Imagine this. Two men in uniform show up at your door, flashing shiny badges, barking orders, and demanding your car keys. They say they're with the police, and your car is being impounded for investigation. Now imagine this. They weren't real cops at all. And the person behind this twisted stunt? My very own HOA president, Karen. What she didn't know was that I'm not just another homeowner. I'm a U.S. Marshal. And when you try to play games with the law, well, let's just say it doesn't end well for you. I just moved into a gated community, quiet, upscale, with neatly trimmed lawns and rules for just about everything. On paper, it sounded perfect. Peaceful streets, kids riding bikes, neighbors waving politely. But in reality, there was a catch. The HOA. Now, I'm not against rules. I understand the purpose. They keep the neighborhood nice. But our HOA president wasn't just strict. She was the very definition of a Karen. You know the type. Always watching, always complaining, always convinced she had the final say in everyone's life. If your grass was half an inch too tall, she'd fine you. If your trash bins weren't pulled in by 6:01 p.m., she'd snap a picture and mail you a violation notice. It didn't take me long to realize that Karen wasn't running an HOA. She was running a dictatorship. Normally, I ignored her nonsense. I figured she thrived on control and attention, and the best way to deal with people like her was not to give her either. But then came the real issue, my car. I own a Porsche 911. Sleek, black, spotless. It's my pride and joy. I've worked years for it, and when I pull into the driveway, it's not just a car. It's a symbol of my hard work. But to Karen, it was a crime against the neighborhood. She cornered me one day, practically seething, and said the Porsche was too flashy and brought the wrong kind of attention. She even suggested it was lowering the property values, because apparently, in her world, a luxury car was worse than weeds in the yard. At first, I laughed it off. I thought it was just another one of her ridiculous complaints. But I quickly learned it wasn't just a passing comment. It was an obsession. The first warning was a letter in my mailbox. Neatly folded, official-looking, but with her personal signature at the bottom. Your vehicle does not align with community standards. It read, "Please remove it from the neighborhood immediately." I chuckled and tossed it in the trash. A week later, another letter came. Then another. Then a voicemail, where Karen's voice dripped with condescension. "Sir, I am giving you one last opportunity to comply with HOA standards. That car does not belong here." I shook my head. I mean, come on. It's not like I was parking a rusted-out junker on the lawn. It was a Porsche. A Porsche. But then it got personal. One morning, I walked outside to grab the newspaper, and there she was, standing at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, wagging her finger at my car like it had personally offended her. "That car doesn't belong here," she snapped. "Either you move it out of the neighborhood, or I'll make sure it gets moved for you." I remember staring at her, stunned. Was she threatening me? Over a car? I should have known right then. This wasn't going to end peacefully. Word spread quickly. Neighbors started whispering about Karen's crusade against my Porsche. Some thought it was ridiculous. Others were too afraid of crossing her to say anything. But I started noticing strange things. Tire tracks in front of my driveway late at night. Someone had left a sticky note on my windshield with the words, "You've been warned." I installed cameras around the house, just to be safe. And sure enough, one night, I caught Karen on video. She wasn't doing anything illegal, just standing there, staring at my car in the dark, like some kind of watchdog. It was unsettling, to say the least. The situation came to a head one Saturday morning. I was washing the Porsche, minding my own business, when Karen marched over, HOA binder in hand like it was a weapon. "I've had enough," she said, her voice sharp. "That car is a violation, and if you don't move it, I will take matters into my own hands." I dried my hands with a towel and looked her straight in the eye. "Karen, my car is perfectly legal. It's parked in my own driveway. You don't have any authority here." Her face turned red, and she jabbed a finger in my chest. "We'll see about that." Then she stormed off. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't bluffing. She was planning something. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Cars I didn't recognize drove slowly past my house. Karen avoided me, but I caught glimpses of her whispering with strangers near the HOA office. Something was coming. Something bigger than fines, letters, or angry phone calls. And when it did finally come, when two fake cops showed up at my door demanding the keys to my Porsche, I realized just how far Karen was willing to go to get rid of me. But what she didn't know, what she could never have predicted, was that I wasn't just another homeowner she could bully. I was a U.S. Marshal. And Karen had just picked the wrong battle. The fake cops at my door. One Saturday afternoon, I was at home, quietly working on some paperwork in my study. The neighborhood was calm, birds chirping, the distant hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Everything felt normal until I heard it. A loud, heavy knock. Not the casual knock of a neighbor borrowing sugar. No, it was sharp, authoritative. The kind of knock that makes your stomach drop, because you know whoever's on the other side means business. I walked to the front door and opened it. Standing there were two men in what looked like police uniforms. Dark shirts, shiny badges, duty belts strapped around their waists. "Sir," one of them said firmly, "your vehicle is part of an ongoing investigation. We need to impound it immediately." Now, most people in my situation might have panicked. Imagine two so-called cops demanding your car keys, talking about investigations, threatening trouble if you don't comply. A normal person might have handed over the keys without thinking. But me? I noticed details. And those details didn't add up. Their uniforms were sloppy. The patches didn't match. One had a belt with a holster, the other didn't. And their badges, those badges, looked like they were ordered off the internet. Too shiny. Too fake. I narrowed my eyes. My instincts as a U.S. Marshal kicked in immediately. Something was off, and I wasn't about to hand over my Porsche to a couple of con artists. Still, I decided to play along. "Oh, really?" I said, leaning against the doorframe, pretending to be casual. "What's the investigation about?" The two men glanced at each other. For a second, I swear I saw a panic flicker in their eyes. Then the first one blurted out, "Drug trafficking." The second one, clearly not on the same page, mumbled, "Stolen vehicle." Red flag. Huge red flag. Real officers don't stumble like that. Real officers know exactly why they're there. I crossed my arms. Interesting. Drug trafficking and stolen vehicle? Which is it? They ignored my question, growing more impatient. "Look, just give us the keys and no one gets in trouble." And that was it, the final confirmation. These weren't cops. They were hired hands. And I had a very good guess about who had sent them. I forced a smile and stepped back inside. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Let me grab the keys." I closed the door behind me, my heart pounding. Not with fear, but with focus. I wasn't going for keys. I was going for my badge. And my gun. In the drawer by the entry table, I pulled out my U.S. Marshal badge, polished and unmistakable, clipped it to my belt. Then I reached for my firearm, sliding it into its holster. When I stepped back outside, the entire mood shifted. Both men looked at me expectantly, probably thinking they'd scored an easy car theft. Instead, I raised my badge, holding it high so there was no mistaking it. "U.S. Marshal," I said sharply. "You boys are under arrest." The shock on their faces was priceless. Their fake confidence melted instantly. One stuttered, "We didn't know." "Yeah." I cut him off. "That's your first mistake." The second was thinking you could con me. Before they could even react, I drew my gun and ordered them to the ground. My voice was firm, commanding, and they knew they were beat. They dropped to their knees, hands behind their heads. In less than a minute, I had them cuffed and sprawled on the pavement of my driveway. As I called in backup, one of them cracked. Nervous, sweating, he started spilling everything. "Karen," he blurted. It was Karen. She hired us. I froze for a moment, but deep down, I already knew. HOA Karen. Of course. Who else would be bold or stupid enough to orchestrate something like this? "She told us to take the car," the man continued. "Make it look like a police impound, and she'd handle the rest. We were just supposed to scare you." Scare me? They thought they could scare me out of my own car, in my own home. Karen had officially crossed the line from nuisance to criminal mastermind wannabe. When the local police arrived, the scene must have looked wild. 2 fake officers cuffed in my driveway, my Porsche shining in the background, and me standing there, badge on display. The officers took custody of the imposters, shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all. Identity theft, impersonating law enforcement, attempted grand theft auto. The charges piled up fast. But I wasn't satisfied yet, because while those 2 clowns were headed to jail, the mastermind was still sitting comfortably in her HOA throne, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. That same evening, I marched straight to Karen's house. 2 squad cars followed me for backup, their lights flickering in the night. Karen opened the door, her usual smug look plastered on her face. But the moment she saw me, with officers behind me, her expression faltered. "Karen," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "you're under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted grand theft auto." Her jaw dropped. "What? That's ridiculous. I was just trying to enforce community rules." I shook my head slowly. "No, Karen. You tried to steal my car. And worse, you put innocent people in danger by faking law enforcement." The officers moved in, reading her rights as she sputtered and protested. But it was over. Her little reign of terror had ended. Karen was arrested that night. Turns out, she'd been abusing HOA power for years, funneling money, writing fake fines, even threatening other homeowners. Nobody had dared to challenge her until now. The neighborhood was stunned, but relieved. For the first time, people could breathe easy without worrying about Karen lurking behind every bush with a clipboard. As for me, my Porsche never left my driveway, and every time I looked at it, gleaming under the streetlight, I couldn't help but smile. Not just because it was a nice car, but because it reminded me of the night Karen finally crossed the wrong person. The night she learned that sometimes, when you try to play cop, you get caught by a real one. When I came back outside, I didn't have keys in my hand. Instead, I had my badge. I held it up high, clear, shiny, unmistakable. U.S. Marshal. You boys are under arrest. The look on their faces was priceless. All the fake bravado, all the tough guy swagger. It drained right out of them in seconds. One stuttered. "We didn't know." "Yeah." I cut him off coldly. "That's your first mistake." Their second mistake was standing on my porch. In a matter of seconds, I had them face down on the ground, their hands yanked behind their backs, cuffs snapping tight. Years of training had taught me how to control a situation like this, and believe me, these 2 weren't professionals. They folded faster than a bad poker hand. I pulled out my phone and called for backup, keeping my gun steady on them while I waited. That's when one of them cracked. His voice shook as he spoke. "Look, man, we didn't mean no harm. We were just hired, okay? It wasn't our idea." I narrowed my eyes. "Who hired you?" He hesitated, glancing at his buddy, but fear won out. "Karen. It was Karen. She told us to take the car, make it look like a police impound, and she'd handle the rest." I almost laughed. It was so absurd it sounded like a bad TV plot. HOA Karen, the woman who fined people for leaving their sprinklers on too long, had orchestrated a fake police sting to steal my Porsche. Unbelievable, but at the same time, completely believable. This was exactly the kind of stunt she'd pull. Minutes later, the real police pulled up, 2 squad cars with sirens off, but lights flashing. When the officers stepped out and saw 2 fake cops cuffed on the ground, they did a double take. I showed them my badge, explained the situation, and handed over the imposters. The officers shook their heads, clearly baffled. "Never seen anything like this," one muttered as they loaded the men into the back of a cruiser. "Fake uniforms, fake badges, all to steal a car? Ridiculous." "Not just ridiculous," I corrected. "Criminal." I made it clear I wanted full charges pressed: impersonating law enforcement, conspiracy, attempted grand theft auto. But deep down, I wasn't satisfied. The imposters were just pawns. I wanted the person holding the chessboard. I wanted Karen. So I did what had to be done. With 2 squad cars following behind me, I walked down the street to Karen's house. She lived in a perfectly manicured 2-story with roses lined up like soldiers in her front yard. The kind of house that screamed control and perfection, just like her. When she opened the door, she had that same smug look she always wore, like she was the queen of the neighborhood, and I was just another peasant. But that smugness didn't last long. Behind me, the red and blue lights bounced off her windows. 2 uniformed officers stood at my side, and I was staring straight at her with my badge clipped to my belt. Her smile faltered. What's going on? Karen, I said calmly, my voice cutting like a knife. You're under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted grand theft auto. Her jaw dropped. She actually gasped like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. What? That's insane. I was just trying to enforce community rules. I shook my head slowly, almost pitying her. No, Karen. Enforcing community rules means sending letters about trash bins. What you did, that was plotting a crime. You tried to steal from me, and you picked the wrong guy to mess with. Her face turned red. She waved her hands dramatically, trying to spin the story. No, you don't understand. That car doesn't belong here. It's disruptive. Enough, I cut her off. My tone was sharp, final. Save it for your lawyer. The officer stepped forward, and Karen instinctively backed up into her own living room, sputtering and yelling. But the more she protested, the guiltier she sounded. This is a mistake. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president, she screamed. Exactly, I replied. And now you're about to be the HOA president behind bars. The officers read her rights while slipping cuffs onto her wrists. She fought it at first, jerking her arms away, but it was pointless. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, was let out of her castle in handcuffs. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some even stepping out onto their porches. You could hear the whispers. Is that Karen? Oh my God, they're arresting her. For years, she had terrorized this community with petty fines and power trips. Now, the entire neighborhood was watching justice unfold right on her front lawn. As they guided her into the back of the squad car, she shouted one last desperate line. I was just protecting the neighborhood. But no one believed her anymore. In the days that followed, the truth about Karen unraveled quickly. The police found records of fraudulent fines, suspicious payments to contractors, who turned out to be her relatives, and multiple complaints from homeowners she'd bullied into silence. She wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was running a scam empire under the guise of community enforcement. The neighborhood was stunned. Some people were angry. Others were relieved. But almost everyone felt the same thing, freedom. The HOA held an emergency meeting and unanimously voted her out. A new board was elected, one that actually cared about the community, not control. As for me, my Porsche stayed exactly where it belonged, shining in my driveway. Untouched, untouchable. Neighbors who had never spoken to me before came by, shaking my hand, thanking me for standing up to her. Some admitted they had been too scared to challenge Karen, but now, with her gone, they felt like the neighborhood could finally breathe again. And me? I didn't need thanks. Watching her being walked out of her perfect house in handcuffs was satisfaction enough. The message was clear. If you think you can play games with the law, if you think you can bully, intimidate, and scheme your way into power, sooner or later, you'll run into someone who doesn't play. Karen messed with the wrong neighbor. She messed with a U.S. Marshal. And that was her last mistake. Karen's fall from power. Karen was arrested that same night. 1 minute she was the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, strutting around with her binder full of violations. And the next she was in the back of a squad car, wrists cuffed, her empire crumbling. Her little HOA power trip had finally blown up in her face. The police didn't just take her word for anything either. Once they had her in custody, they started digging. And what they found was shocking, even to me. Turns out, Karen had been running her HOA like a personal piggy bank. Fraudulent fines, falsified records, pocketing dues that were supposed to go toward landscaping and maintenance. She even had a little scheme where she hired contractors, who were nothing more than her cousins and family friends, charging triple rates and keeping the profits. This wasn't just about a car. This was years of corruption hiding in plain sight. When word spread, the entire neighborhood was stunned. For so long, everyone thought Karen was just annoying, petty. controlling. They had no idea she was also lining her pockets behind the scenes. But here's the thing. Shock quickly turned into relief. People who had lived under her rule for years, people who had been fined for leaving up Christmas lights a week too long, or for having the wrong shade of beige on their shutters, they finally felt free. It was like a weight had been lifted off the entire community. Neighbors who never dared to speak out suddenly came forward with their own stories. She fined me $200 because my dog barked once. She made me repaint my fence 3 times in 2 years, claiming the color wasn't approved. She threatened to tow my son's car because it had a dent. Everyone had a Karen story. And now, finally, she was facing real consequences. Not a slap on the wrist. Not just an angry letter in return. Real legal consequences. As for me, my Porsche stayed right where it belonged, in my driveway, shining brighter than ever. I'd be lying if I said I didn't give it an extra polish that week, just to make a point. Every time I walked out and saw it gleaming under the sun, I couldn't help but smile. That car had been the center of all this madness, the target of her obsession. And yet, in the end, it sat untouched, exactly where it should be. But the Porsche wasn't the only thing that stayed. Peace returned to the neighborhood. For the first time since I'd moved in, I could step outside without feeling eyes burning into me from across the street. And something unexpected happened, too. Neighbors who had barely said a word to me before started coming up, shaking my hand, thanking me. Thank you for standing up to her. Man, I've wanted to see that woman taken down for years. You did what we all wanted to, but never could. Some even joked, "Glad you're on our side, Marshal." Within weeks, the HOA held a vote. Unsurprisingly, Karen was permanently removed from her position. The community wasted no time electing a new board, people who actually cared about fairness and improving the neighborhood, not about flexing power and padding their pockets. Meetings became constructive instead of confrontational. Rules were enforced reasonably instead of obsessively. For the first time, it felt like a real community instead of a dictatorship. And you could feel the shift in the air. Kids played outside longer. People waved to each other more often. Neighbors who had been keeping to themselves started talking again. It was amazing what removing one toxic person could do for an entire neighborhood. But the best part? Watching Karen get walked out of her own house in handcuffs. I'll never forget the sight. Her shouting about community rules and respect for authority. Her voice cracking as the officers guided her into the back of the squad car. Her perfectly trimmed roses and spotless lawn were the backdrop for her downfall. The same neighbors she once bullied into silence were standing at their windows, watching the show. Some even smiled. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But one thing was clear. Nobody was sad to see her go. So here's the takeaway. If you've got a Karen in your life, the kind of person who thinks they run the world, who thrives on control and intimidation, let them talk. Let them rant. Let them wave their finger and write their little notes. Because usually, that's all it is, noise. But the second they cross the line into crime, the second they try to turn their obsession into something more dangerous, that's when you draw the line. That's when you stand firm and make sure they never forget who they tried to mess with. Karen thought she could scare me. She thought she could trick me. She thought she could take something from me that wasn't hers. But she didn't know who I was. She didn't know what I was capable of. And in the end, she learned the hard way that justice always wins.